Once you've ruled out the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be true.
And it is not a question of a little occultism or a touch of mysticism, Mr. Denton. It is vampires. It's a host of damned souls of telepaths.
I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night.
Here, the old gods aren't dead.
And what of the true god?
He's dead. You can't complain.
People assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
You're listening to Paranormal UK Radio.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Paranormal UK Radio Show, the flagship show here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm your one and only host tonight, Mark Johnson, and our usual host, Irene Allen, is unable to make it tonight. She is not only not feeling so well herself, but has a sick doggy she's taking care of, so she will not be here tonight. Just want to also let everybody know that we will not have a show next week due to the fact that I'm traveling. So we'll be back in 2 weeks with a new show. One other thing I wanted to mention is I wanted to put out there to everybody that there is a guest that we've had on a couple times on our show, and he's a friend of ours, John Edmond, who owns the Stardust Ranch down in Arizona. Anybody who is not familiar with that, you look up his story. He has his book out. It's pretty much very much like the Skinwalker Ranch, except a lot more intense. And about a week and a half ago, John had a very serious medical condition. A blood vessel burst in his chest, and he had to be rushed to the hospital. And he's back home now, but in very serious condition. And his wife, Joyce, who also is not very healthy, is stuck with trying to keep the ranch going and taking care of him. We have created a GoFundMe page for John. So if you go out to GoFundMe and look for Stardust Ranch, you should find it. And any donations that you make goes directly to John and his wife to help with his medical expenses and with help keeping the ranch going, because they run their charity, Helpful Hooves, which, they take care of abandoned horses and other animals. John has such a big heart, and he's been doing that for a lot of years. So again, any help that anybody could provide, we really appreciate it. We wish John a speedy recovery. Hopefully, I hope to have him back on the show again here soon, because he's had some very unique experiences with all of this happening, and I think he has a lot to say about it. So, John, we'll be talking with you soon, I sincerely hope. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and get right into tonight's show. Now, we have a very interesting guest. His name is Robert Lyndsy Milne, and he is what you would call a psychic intuitive counselor. He lives up in Toronto. He's a Toronto native, and he started off working as what he would call a hippie psychic at a tea house back when he was 19 years old. And now he is very much helping a lot of people out all around the world. So we want to welcome Robert to the program. How are you tonight, Robert?
I'm doing great, and thank you for having me on your show tonight. Just one thing, Mark, I actually started working at the Cozy Tea Room when I was 15 and a half years old. By the time I was 19, I was, a professional. I'd spent years doing it. So I was about 15 and a half when I actually started doing readings for my living.
Wow, okay, so it was a lot younger then.
Yes, it's the way it is the way I got off the streets. I was homeless during that period, and I had survived on the streets using my intuition, my instinct, my psychic ability, and I had heard that if you worked at the Cozy Tea Room doing readings, you would get a sandwich and a cup of tea, plus you would get paid. That would happen if you worked the afternoon shift. If you worked the evening shift, you would get a hot dinner, a cup of tea, and you would also get paid. And I applied there to get to be a reader. And Mrs. Cox was the owner. I had to do a reading for her. I had never done a tea leaf reading in my life, and you had to do tea leaf readings. So I just picked a teacup up and held it in front of me and looked at her and told her what I felt and thought and just did a normal reading. And that was the same with doing cards. She hired me that day, and I worked at the Cozy Tea Room till I was about 21 years old.
Wow.
6 days a week, sometimes 7. It became, the whole focus of my life.
Now, when did you first realize that you had psychic abilities, or that you were able to perceive things that other people around you were not?
The biggest realization for me was discovering other people didn't sense or feel what I sensed and felt. And that was just a profound experience for me. It happened when I was about 9. But if we back up a little bit, for as long as I've been alive, I've lived by my instincts, my awareness, my intuition, my psychic ability. And as a child, I was feeling and sensing things around me or around other people, and I would often get into trouble for things that I'd say. One time I came home from school for lunch. I was either in kindergarten or grade 1. That's a bit of a fog, but it was right around 5-6 years old. And I said to my mother, "Grandma Harris died today." Well, Grandma Harris was my great-grandmother, and she lived in another country, and I'd only seen her once. And so from out of the blue, I said that my mother got so upset. She yelled at me and probably hit me, because that's what she did a lot, and probably hit me for saying bad things. The next night at dinner, because, news traveled slowly back in the 1950s. And the next night at dinner, my sister and I, my mother and father, my mother said to my father, "Grandma Harris died yesterday." And I thought my father was going to get angry with my mother for saying bad things. And to my astonishment, they talked about it. And they talked back and forth, and everybody was civil. And my mother didn't even remember I'd said what I had said the day previous. Throughout my life, I would, say things like, "Uncle Harold, that wasn't Aunt Sally." Who was that woman? Well, that one for sure got me hit. But I didn't know. I just sensed. And what I saw and what I felt just came out. So at a young age, I was clearly doing psychic and intuitive things. Then came the night at Maple Leaf Gardens. I was 9 years old. I was with my dad. Toronto and Boston were playing in the semifinals of the Stanley Cup. The series was tied 1-1, and the game that we went to, it was tied 1-1 at the end of the third period. When the teams came on for the overtime period, I became drawn to number 17 with Toronto, and his name was Gary Eamon. And the game hadn't started. They just sort of were stretching on the ice, and then the referee, blew the whistle. And by the way, Gary Eamon wasn't even wasn't on the starting line. Maple Leaf Gardens, there were 18,000 people. The lights get turned down. The entire building is silent, and the referee is just about to drop the puck. And I realized Gary Eamon was going to score. And I knew it was so real in my mind, it seemed like it had already happened. I jumped up and started yelling and screaming in this big building, this silent building of 18,000 people. And then everybody just turned and looked at me. And my dad put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Sit down, please." And the referee dropped the puck. The game started. A few minutes later, Gary Eamon jumped over the boards, and Red Kelly passed the puck to him, and Eamon tipped the puck in the net, and Maple Leaf Gardens erupted. And I just looked around. As I said, I was 9 years old, and I looked around and I said, nobody knew he was going to score. And that was astonishing. And that was when I knew I was seeing things that other people weren't. And that's how I discovered what I was going to do for the rest of my life was on that night.
Now, would you say your abilities run into more of clairvoyance, or picking up on information, or clairaudience? Do you hear things, see things? I mean, how would you describe your abilities?
Well, that's an interesting question. One of the things that I do with people that have studied with me or taken my classes is to forget about all the words with being psychic or being intuitive or being clairvoyant or being clairsentient or being clairaudient or and you can just come up with so many different names and supposedly so many different ways. People that are learning just get confused. And the real thing about being psychic now. Being psychic and being spiritual is different. Being psychic is a natural ability that most mammals have. And we all have that, perhaps is called a sixth sense. Well, that sixth sense is when we take all five of our senses, touch, taste, smell, see, hear, and use them all together, you get a sixth sense, and that is also called ESP. And we all have that. Have you ever been sitting in a restaurant and you just kind of look up and there's somebody looking at you? Or you start thinking about a friend you hadn't spoken to in 10 years, and all of a sudden you hear from that person. Or you just have an instinct to do something and you move and it saves your life. We all have that instinct. Okay, not exactly. Almost everyone. If you took a bell-shaped curve and there would be one person at one end that would have absolutely zero intuition or psychic ability, and then there's somebody else at the other end that would have 100%, and then the rest of us are in between. But most of us has that intuition, that instinct. How we express it is different. Some people are more visuals. I myself, the words come into my mind and I just know them. I just know it. I also know what I'm going to be saying even when I'm saying something. Even when I know what I'm going to be saying even though I'm saying something different right now. So the information comes through me. I don't worry too much about labeling it. My focus is always just doing it. And whether I see, whether I feel, whether I sense, it really doesn't matter. What matters is the information comes through. Now, that's how it's been for me throughout my life. Other people do it differently, but I keep it pretty simple. And so being psychic is a natural ability that almost all of us have. You don't have to be spiritual to be psychic, although the two often go together.
Very true. I think this is one of those, I will call it a latent ability that comes out in a lot of people. And some people are psychic or have abilities and they're not even aware of it.
Yes.
Because we deal with a lot of societal programming, especially here in Western society, where things like psychic abilities or anything else strange is considered fringe, or you're told that didn't really happen. I mean, I've told stories before. Growing up in my house, I kept hearing someone call my name. I thought it was my mother. So I go down the hall and find her in the den, and I go, "What do you want?" She goes, "I didn't call you." I go, "Yeah, you did."
That's fascinating.
And she goes, "Nope, it wasn't me." She goes, "You must."
Wow.
Now, this is typical of my mother. She goes, "You must be hearing things."
Right.
You know.
Well, you were, but
Well, but that's the thing is that's how society, especially when you're coming from that certain generation,
Absolutely.
they don't want to deal with it, or it doesn't fit into their reality, so they make up excuses for it. They dismiss it out of hand. And I've had precognitive dreams. I've had strange experiences, out of body experiences when I was younger, and I couldn't mention anything like this to my parents because they would just look at me like I had a third head, because it was beyond their comprehension.
I understand that one.
Yeah. So, and even now, even when it's a little bit more socially accepted, it's a little bit more out there in our society, it's still not a part of the real mainstream. And you try to talk about psychic abilities to a lot of people. Again, they look at you like you have a third head, or maybe they're very conditioned, whether through organized religion or other belief systems where they're directly opposed to that type of thing. It frightens them. They've been taught that it's evil, which it certainly is not. It's actually a very natural part of who we are. I mean, look at the fact that you mentioned before other animals. Animals are very psychically intuitive. Look at. I'll use the tsunami that happened in Indonesia. What was it? 10, 15 years ago. Many of the animals knew it was coming and they bolted. There were people who were taking elephant rides, and all of a sudden the elephants took off and started running for the hills with the people on their backs because they knew what was coming. There are people who live in haunted houses, or houses that have paranormal activity, and they'll watch their animals interact and looking at things that aren't there, but they can see it.
So we actually have that same instinct, and that comes with us being a mammal for sure, and almost all of us have that. When we start practicing it or doing it, we get better and better and better at it. But it's something that comes from within us. It's not necessarily something spiritual, although spiritual people do it.
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to be spiritual or religious in order to have these abilities.
Neither good or bad either.
No.
It just sort of it comes with us.
Yes, very much so. It's just a part of who we are. In fact, one thing that I've mentioned on this show many times, and with a lot of some other people that we have interviewed, is I feel that in the very distant past, we were much more in tune with these abilities and our higher selves and what we could do with our lives using these abilities before it was programmed out of us.
That's that for sure.
Yeah, whether it was intentionally or just because of the way society moved forward. But almost to me, it seems the more society advanced, the less advanced we became, and we started taking several evolutionary steps backwards. Now you look at modern day, where we are so over inundated with imagery and cell phones and iPads and internet news and whatever, and there's so many assaults on the senses that anybody who is sensitive would either may not pick up on it, or they may even be so overwhelmed. That's where a lot of anxiety comes from in people, that they're just so overwhelmed with the information overload.
It's been my experience. I teach a class on how to be psychic. I haven't done it for a while, but it's a one-day seminar, and I take a group of people, strangers, and anyone that sits in the class that I do, I guarantee that in that class they will be doing psychic readings before the class is over. And it usually takes about 2 hours to get the people ready and open-minded enough. They're sitting across from one another, a stranger, and tuning in and being psychic with those intuitions and inner abilities. So, we do get overwhelmed. We do get inundated with so much information in our society. But it's been my experience when somebody does just calm down and focus, they get back in touch with those instincts very quickly.
Well, that's where going within, quieting the mind, meditation comes in handy to help, put yourself into that right state of mind, get into that alpha state brainwaves to be able to be more in touch with that's your abilities, your inner self, or what you call your higher self, or higher consciousness, and that kind of information can flow a lot more easier.
It does, indeed. Yes, I've been a professional psychic now for 56 years. I just turned 72. And as I said, I've been working full-time as a psychic since I was 15 and a half. And in that time period, over my career, I've done around 100,000 psychic connections. And that would have been including all the radio shows that I appeared on. And it was earlier in my career that I did the most amount of those sessions. I understand how it works pretty well. It's been my life purpose, by the way. So
now, with some of the information or the connections you get, is it more of you picking up on information from like people, or as you mentioned, you're able to understand when an event is about to happen before it happens? But have you ever come in contact with, let's say, spirits, or people who have died, and you're able to connect with those spirits?
Yes. It's not a part of the field I really was interested in or focused on. I do have some connections. They do happen, more so in my later years than in my earlier years. I tended just to be focused, and the words came out. When for a long time, I believed that my ability, my talent, and it's been a commitment. When I started out in the tea room, as I said, I worked 6 and sometimes 7 days a week, and I would see between 25 and 30 people every day in, day out. And it became, doing readings and developing, expanding, became my main focus in life. And so at around 21 was when I left working at the tea room and struck out on my own. And at the tea room, we did readings for people. It didn't matter how it came through. And a lot of the people that I know that are my friends have said they feel at times that I am channeling. And I may be. Sometimes when I'm doing readings, an hour reading goes by in 15 minutes. Yet I know I've spoken for an hour. Obviously, I'm in an altered state. I usually, the information, my voice doesn't change or things like that. And I think I'm always a conscious, but I may be channeling nonetheless.
If you ever want to see a very interesting channeler, and again, I'm not sitting here and claiming she's 100% legit, but because I look at it takes a lot for a psychic medium channeler, let's say, bringing forth information to really convince me of something. Sure. But I will say there's this British woman. Her name is Elaine Thorpe, and we've had her on the show, and she's a trans channeler. She goes into deep trance and channels her guide, Jonathan. Now, most times you see people, if you've seen videos of channelers, their voice stays the same, or maybe they'll get high and squeaky, or they'll get all bubbly, or something weird. Elaine is completely different. When you see Elaine, she's very soft-spoken, mild-mannered, very high-pitched voice. Then when she goes in trance, and then when Jonathan comes through, if you close your eyes, you would swear to God you're talking to a man. Her voice changes so drastically, and it's this cultured Englishman. He's supposedly from the 1800s, and he comes through with a lot of advice. Now, a lot of what he comes through is very light and fluffy, which, that part doesn't impress me as much. But, if she is faking it with being able to change her voice, kudos to her, because that is the most amazing transformation I've ever seen in my life.
I've known a few people that do that as the woman you're speaking of. It hasn't been what has interested me. My focus has been, giving service, taking care of people the way I do it, and the way I do it mostly is conscious.
Mm-hmm. And when you're helping people, what would that entail in general? Giving them, readings or guiding them in their life purpose?
Yes to those three questions. When I do a reading for somebody, a psychic reading, my readings are a monologue rather than a dialogue. And I don't ask questions in the reading. So when I do a reading for somebody, I do. I ask two questions. How old are you now? And what month is your next birthday? And I ask their age because I just want to know where they are in time. And I ask what month very simply because it just gives me a sharper connection to them. And I just simply start off with stating the date, my name, and their name, and then I speak. Then I do a monologue, and it goes on for 50, 55 minutes, and sometimes if I'm really in the mood, it goes on a little bit longer. And after that, there's a question period where people can ask any questions that they may have. I ask people not to interrupt me, because when I'm doing the reading, I may have made a mistake, but I'm constantly checking, going back to looking at what I've already said and what I'm saying, and I correct any mistakes that I've made. It's like painting a picture. You paint a little bit here and a little bit there, and you come back and fix things. That's what it's like doing a reading, for me to do a reading. In most readings, certainly at this time in my life, it wasn't always, but when I tune into somebody, I often see the conception, although not the act. I see when it happened, and I see the completion of their life. And throughout the reading, I go forward and backward in time. Although I don't spend too much time at the far end. I spend most of the time talking about where their life is right now, where it's going, and I'll talk a fair amount about the past. It's a monologue that covers their life, and it comes off the top of my head, and then we do questions. And all my readings are recorded. They have to be. It's the rule.
Now, with the monologues that you do for your clients, you mentioned you go forward and backward in time. Is it when you're talking about, let's say, the past? Is it bringing up the past in relation to modern problems or modern things that they're going through?
Often that would be the case. It would be looking at a past injury, looking at something that had affected my client's life. They may not understand it. That'll happen. So that would be one of the reasons.
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead. Be my guest.
So I guarantee my work, and that means that when I do a reading for somebody, I guarantee from the time I do the reading until the ending of my life or theirs, if there's ever a time they're unsatisfied, all they have to do is contact me and give me back the recording. Well, they don't. It's digital now. I ask them to delete the recording, and I just give them back their money. That's just, and it's always been that way for me. So I don't guarantee that I'm 100% correct. I guarantee that I've done a good job and I've satisfied my client. That's the guarantee. And I always get paid at the end of the reading and never before.
Okay.
It's part of the process that I use.
That's a good process.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had many readings, and just not sitting here saying I'm a skeptic by any means. Obviously I'm not, but I am very skeptical about a lot of the people who do claim themselves to be psychic, because they, in most cases, they're either absolutely full of it, or maybe they have a little bit of ability, but they're very much overselling themselves. So
are you talking about professionals or just people on the street?
Well, professionionals or people who do it on kind of like yourself. They set up a clientele. They advertise themselves. In fact, a lot of them, that's how they make their money and do their business. And in most cases, I've been friends with a few people, and in spending time with them, I've learned that they may have an ability, they may pick up on things, but I've also caught them. There's this one woman in general, I won't mention her name, who did have some ability. She picked up on a few things. Some things happened that were very interesting. But when I asked her for a personal reading, she totally blew it. In every way. I mean, nothing came through. And even sometimes I understand that sometimes something can come in a reading and maybe you'll get a realization after the fact. Something, it may not make sense to you now, but, after the fact. Well, no, they were just absolutely dead wrong in every way. But yet I've seen them have some ability. And I think what happens with some of these people is they're under pressure to perform, and they're being paid for their service. So unlike you, they're taking the money no matter what, and they feel pressured to give out this information when maybe they're not picking anything up. This same woman, she would hold public forums and have 40, 50 people show up. She'd do them once a month, and she would do readings around the room and ask people. But then I noticed she started asking very leading questions. Is somebody here having trouble with their knee? Well, everybody in the room's over 40, so yeah, everyone's having trouble with their knee. But she would ask some questions that would narrow down and lead people in certain ways. And I wasn't very impressed with it.
I can't comment on that simply because I wasn't there to watch her. It's been my experience with the people that I know, and a great amount of my career has been as a performing psychic on radio and TV shows and in mainstream media, and traveled around a good part of the English-speaking world doing that. It's been my experience that anyone that does this work, almost everybody that does this work, believes they're doing and giving a service to people. Most people that do this believe they're helping, they're aiding, they're giving counsel, and sincere. The thing is that not everybody is capable of playing in the NBA, or not everybody is able to play in the NFL, and not everyone that does readings are at the top of the field. I'm lucky in that I've been doing this for 56 years, and I don't miss a day of I either do readings or I practice being psychic, and I do that as a discipline. Not everybody is that committed. Not everybody has that skill. There are some people that are pretty good. There are some that are, well, maybe not so good. There are some that aren't very good at all, or not very developed, or not had the opportunity to. Very few, very, very few are fraudulent. Very few.
Well, I have run into some fraudulence, and again, I don't mean to sound negative.
Maybe they're just lousy readers. You know, like there's a difference between being a fraud and being lousy at it.
There's one person who I was convinced was a fraud, who tried charging. My wife went for a reading to someone, and this woman tried to tell her, "Oh, you have all this negativity surrounding you, this negative energy. For $300, I'll clear it out for you."
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's somebody there's one of the ones that fit in the category of a hustler. Okay, yeah. And you know, there are bottom feeders in every field. Mm-hmm. But there's not that many. There's a small portion. Most people either aren't fully evolved yet, or they're learning, or they're having a bad day, or they don't have the greatest amount of talent. But their effort most of the time is caring about people and giving service.
And I just want to clarify something here. I hope you're not feeling like I'm attacking all psychics.
I'm not.
Yeah, I'm not. I'm just stating from my own personal experiences, and I have to admit that I'm a hard read. I know people.
Really? Is that really?
Well,
not true. Tell me that's not true.
Again, as I mentioned, I've had several readings, and with the exception of one, either all of it or 90% of it did not apply to me. The one that did apply to me was this woman was so good she was scary. And I only read with her once. My wife read with her a couple of times, but this was during... I'm going to do a very long story, very, very short, because there's a lot I don't want to get into. But let's just say that I did a reading with this woman at a psychic fair. There was a friend of mine who was there who himself was very sensitive and psychic, and he said that he's able to walk through and pick out who's really sensitive and who really isn't. And the woman, he pointed out the woman who actually, hosted the fair. He said, "Nah, she's not that good." But then he pointed this woman out in the corner, and he goes, I'm feeling she's really strong. So I said, "Okay, I'll go get a reading from her." The reading I got from her, well, two things about it. First of all, she gave me a lot of negative or bad news. And the only thing with her I disagreed on was her presentation. Not very good bedside manner, if you know what I mean. She cut to the chase on several negative things that were going to come up in my life. And at the time, I'm sitting there going, okay, fine. And let's just say that they happened in spades, including predicting. She thought that I was going to have a major medical issue. Turns out it was my identical twin brother who just a few weeks later dropped dead of a heart attack.
Oh, wow. Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, but she saw me, but we're identical twins. So, and then she saw there was an aftermath that would take place with that, which happened. And again, it was, her presentation could have been a little more, what's the word I'm looking for? Not professional, but a little bit more, maybe a little more compassionate.
The way I do things in that situation is I talk about the result of the event that is going to be happening. I talk about the outcome, the result of it. And then I come back and then talk about the event. And when I'm doing readings at this stage in my life, I've been doing this process. It's been about 10, 12 years. When I deal with people that are in crises, which is often, I look forward in time to say when they're 80 years old. And then I look back through their eyes and I describe to them how they feel at 80, the way they solved the problem that they're in right now. So that tells my clients two things. One, they're going to solve it. And two, they're going to be around for a pretty long time. And and I do that deliberately. And I wouldn't do it if I couldn't do it if they weren't going to be 80 years old. So I go forward in the future. I look back through their awareness and I describe to them how they feel about the way they solved the problem. And then I talk to them back to the present, and then I talk to them about how the problem is getting solved and the direction. So I'm focused on healing, and while I don't particularly like giving bad news, I do, although I'm very soft and tender about it most of the time.
Yeah, and that is the proper way to do it. I'm not so much an either or kind of person. I see things a little bit broader or different than that. And there are times where someone like the woman you're speaking of, being blunt and to the point, sometimes that's the right thing to do. Sometimes it's not the right thing to do, or it's not the right thing to do to get a positive response. Mm-hmm. But there are people that want to be spoken to like that. That I can understand.
So that particular person who does that kind of work for this particular client, that they would be seen as, wow, wonderful, fabulous, incredible. Whereas somebody that would see her as fabulous and wonderful and incredible, if they came to me, they'd say, well, maybe he's dull and boring, or he doesn't quite connect, or, you know. So it's more the person being in tune with the psychic, with the connection with the psychics, which is one of the reasons why I guarantee my work. And also, just because someone's coming to me for a reading, it doesn't necessarily mean they get the reading. If I don't think I'm doing the absolute best that I can, I just stop and I apologize and I say I'm very, very sorry. I'm not giving you the best, my best service. And that can happen even at the beginning of the reading. And there have been times in my life at the end where when I was using cassettes or onto CDs, I would have the CD burned, and I would say, I always sign my work. So when I was using cassettes, I would always sign the cassette before I asked the person to pay me. And if I didn't think that the service I gave was worthy of signing my name, I wouldn't charge the person for the reading, and well, they couldn't have the recording, and I wouldn't charge them. So I would sign every session, and I would be putting my name on it, saying I've given you my best before. So that's the criteria that I work by. It's different than with others, but I guess I'd be a lot richer if I just took the money every time someone came. But I don't do it that way.
Now, when you're giving a reading to a client and you go into the past, you can look into the past, and then you can also look into the future.
And the present, too, and constantly move back and forth.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a little bit about that concept of time and being able to look into the future. I mean, I mentioned earlier in the program, I've had precognitive dreams. I dreamed of 9/11 2 days before it happened. Wow. Although my dream was highly symbolic and it was using symbolism rather than actually showing me the real event. I've had other dreams that I would have a dream of something so mundane, like I was part of a softball league and I had a dream that morning that, I was catcher and somebody was going to do a pop fly and I'd catch it. Sure enough, I go to the game and the very first play, the very first pitch, the guy does a pop fly and I catch it.
Wow,
and
that's great.
So, little things like everything from super mundane like that to like something incredibly horrid like 9/11, these things creep in. And a lot of times I think I've also received information. I'm able to pick up on things occasionally. It's not all the time. I have to be in the right frame of mind. And a lot with me lately is I'm trying to open myself more to get back into it because I got so busy with my day job and personal life and everyday physical things that I kind of set a lot of that aside. So I'm trying to get back into opening myself up to experience it, because in the past I would receive information. In a meditative state, I could ask yes or no questions and I would receive responses, and they were almost always right. Whether it's the fact that I'm receiving it from, an outside source, or whether it's just my own subconscious or even higher self answering questions that I would already know. It's hard to tell, but it's a possibility. There have also been times where I've been able, as I mentioned before the show, when we were talking, I'm a paranormal investigator. Haven't done it in a few years because of that break I mentioned, but I'm trying to get back into it. But I've been on cases where if I sit quietly, I'll pick up information, and I've picked up names of people that turned out to be accurate, what they were wearing, what they looked like. Information would come. There were even times where my wife and I, we lived in a house, and the house itself, I wouldn't say was haunted, but I think there was a portal or something there on the property, because there would be fleeting things. It felt like things would come and go. And one night we're sitting there watching television, and all of a sudden both of us just started feeling like we were being watched. And I looked down across from the living room into the dining room, and there was nobody there. But yet in my mind's eye, I saw a clear picture of this burly man in what looked like tan coveralls, looked like a construction worker with a shaved head, and he was just standing there staring at us. And that image was in my mind for several minutes. And then after a while, it faded away. He was gone, and then we no longer felt the presence. So there are other times when, and something I've always told people is pay attention to your body. Your body gives you a lot of signals and information that you would normally blow off. Another case in point, I went to a house where they were claiming they were having activity, and no sooner did I walk in the door when all of a sudden I started getting a tightness in my chest. I started feeling ultra anxious and started to hyperventilate a little bit. And I'm sitting there going, what in the heck is going on here? I just had this, the energy was just feeling so intense. At one point I had to go outside and step outside. When I stepped outside, I was perfectly fine. When I walked back into the house, it hit me again, overwhelmed me. And then it started to turn into fear, and I never get afraid in cases. I realized after a bit that whatever was there didn't like me there and was trying to get rid of me and was doing everything in its power to, induce my fear factor, or was putting out enough energy that my body was able to pick up on that energy and was giving me those signals that, hey, something is like really working on you right now. But I felt like it was a male entity who was trying to get me to get out of his domain.
I'm sure you were right. How did you handle it after that?
I stuck through it. I wouldn't let him have the upper hand. And we did the investigation, and I was with other people there at the time. But this was back in the days. This is where one of the reasons why I don't quite do things like that anymore is because when most of these paranormal groups, if you've ever seen the TV shows, Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventures, they go in with their equipment, they investigate, maybe they capture a bunch of stuff, and I've gotten some great evidence in my time. But then usually once you do it, oh yeah, you can share it with the client, whatever, and you walk away and go home. And who have you helped? Maybe you've given them a little bit of understanding of what they're dealing with, but you haven't solved the situation for them, especially if they're frightened. And I started to have a problem with that. I started to back away from the equipment side of investigation and started focusing more on what my body and intuition was telling me, and trying to be able to tune in on what was there, and if it was possible to convince it to leave and move on, I would. I've been successful in a few cases, but again, I kind of got out of that a little while ago, and I'm trying to get back into it again because I let the real world kind of come back. But it's possible, and again, it's listening to what your body tells you. If a thought comes into your head that seems kind of strange, to not just dismiss it out of hand. Maybe you're picking up on something. When people who are able to tell when a song's about to come on the radio, and a minute later, or they're switching stations, there it is. I also had synchronicities happen to me, though, where after my brother died, I started hearing, literally everywhere, the Pink Floyd song, Wish You Were Here. And that song holds a lot of meaning to me, because when I hear it, or especially during this time frame, I always felt it was my brother's way of letting me know he was around.
I understand that.
So, kind of getting back to, I kind of got off on a tangent here, which I apologize. When you're doing your readings, you're jumping forward and backward in present in time.
It's not jumping forward. It's going forward, and it's a smooth rhythmic process that I have. And so what I've chosen to use my abilities for, or where I'm drawn to, is helping people get through crises. That's been my work. I do other things in my psychic work, but the real purpose is helping people get through their difficulties in the moment. Mm-hmm. That's my focus. So I spent my lifetime doing that, so I don't have a great knowledge of all the other paranormal fields. I know a lot about behavior and instinct and that type of stuff, and I'm really drawn to that type of work. Although my work is always about healing.
Now, with healing is do you mean bringing them?
And for me, mostly inside with things that have happened. Although I have been involved in some physical cases. There was an incident, and the name of the book, by the way, that was written about it is called The Perfect Predator, and it's about an epidemiologist. It's written by the epidemiologist who's a client of mine, and her husband, who's an Indiana Jones kind of guy. They went away on vacation. Tom got sick while they were in Egypt. He contracted the most potent superbug on the planet. At the time, it was 100% antibiotic resistant, which means when you get that, you die. When that occurred, I was with Stephanie, that's the epidemiologist. She called me from Egypt at the time, and for the next 8 months, I worked with both Stephanie and Tom while he was in the coma, and I also helped Stephanie, although I didn't cause her to find the cure, but I told her that she would be able to find a cure. That was something incurable, and she only had a short amount of time. I helped her do that part. But there were several times when Tom, when he was in a coma and when he was letting go, as in letting himself drift off as in completing his life, I knew what was happening. I knew what he needed, and I supplied that. When Tom got the cure that Stephanie had found, and it wasn't just Stephanie and I, there was a group of scientists around the world at the time. And when Tom gained consciousness, and when they were writing the book Perfect Predator, Tom was discussing what it was like being in a coma and how he could hear what was going on. And there was one time I knew Tom was going to be Tom's strength. I would visualize a candle that was lit. And if the flame was strong, I knew that whatever was going on with Tom physically, he wasn't dying then. If the flame flickered, it showed me that there was a really serious problem. There was one point early, they'd been medevac to Germany, and Tom was in isolation because of the superbug, and everybody around him was wearing hazmat suits. And with the connection that I had with Tom, he didn't know what was going on. He was sick. He could hear things being talked, the doctors and talking, but he didn't have a grasp as where he was. It was very dark for him, and he was cold. And he was letting go, and he was lonely, and he needed his children. I knew that. So I told Stephanie, and I said to her, Tom needs to have his children around him. Yesterday would have been a good day. Today's a good day. Tomorrow's not so good. If you wait any longer, don't bother. That night, his daughters showed up and we did that in the morning, and they jumped on a plane and flew to Germany that day. And when they arrived and they got close to their father, his vital signs started getting stronger. And in the book, Stephanie writes about the scientific part and what was going on, and Tom has remembrances from being in that coma. and he was describing that incident as in the book, how he was letting go and missing his daughters and drifting away, and then they arrived, and he writes about that as well. So while I didn't actually find the cure, while I didn't play a main role, but on 3 different occasions, had I not been doing that work, he would have died. So, and I often do work with people that are very sick, or they're in comas. I am good at connecting and sensing where they're at. I've been relatively good at finding people, but I don't like doing that.
Finding people as in missing people?
Yes.
Okay.
But I don't like to do it. Usually the only time I do it is when I'm confronted or forced to. And there's been a couple of times where I was forced that I had to do it, and I did. So, and the reason that I don't like doing that kind of work is because most of the time who you're looking for is dead. And I don't like telling people that things that like that. I just don't have the personality to tell somebody I'm really sorry your child is dead. I just can't. I just couldn't do it and be healthy.
That's understandable.
Yeah, I don't have that for me. It would destroy me.
We mentioned earlier about how people who have these abilities, some can be very spiritual or religious, or some can, not be spiritual at all. Where would you classify yourself in that? Do you have, strong spiritual beliefs, or not? And if there's things you don't want to answer, you don't have to.
Oh,
but I'm just curious.
I'll answer anything that you ask me. I just let me just sort of think about it. Early in my life. So before I ran away from home, I was involved with a church. It was the Presbyterian church. It was a Protestant church, and I just sort of drifted away. Then I was on the street, and that was where my psychic abilities were honed. I haven't focused a lot on being spiritual or religion. There was a time in my life where I said I didn't believe in God, and that I said all the things that I do are from me. I do them. They're my instincts, my intuitions, my feelings, my energy. And it's got nothing to do with God. And I denied that there was a God for a pretty long time. And as I got older, as I got more personally confident, I started opening my mind more and more. One of the reasons that I said or denied an existence of God was at a really young age, like at 16 and 17 years old. I was helping and giving service and counsel to people that could have been my grandfather or grandmother. So if there would have been a God, then I would be doing God's work. And I just was not worthy to do such a thing. So if I acknowledged that there was a God, I would also have to acknowledge my unworthiness. And I just didn't feel that I had that I was worthy to do God's work or that type of stuff, to be called. And, looking back, like 2,000 years, in those days, somebody that did my job were called a prophet. Well, I love the title, but I certainly would never be worthy of such a thing. So I denied that there was a God. As I matured, as I grew, as I saw more, I started at times believing, and now I have a firm belief that there is a creator. It's not a religion, and I think that while everybody has an opinion as to what God is, we have as much awareness of what God is as a whale would of the Gobi Desert. We just don't see that far. On the other hand, there are times where I've been influenced. There are times when I've been protected. I've done things that were could have been called miracles, but it wasn't me that was doing them, or it was coming through me. So I do accept that there's a spiritual, there's a presence, there is God, there's a creator. What I focus on is being kind, being loving, being caring, giving as much as I can. And for me, that's being spiritual. And as I've gotten older, I've been more like that.
I understand that. Ironically, I also grew up in Presbyterian church, and
you had, in order to be a member, you had to be able to spell it.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I tried to be, especially when I was in high school and I was younger, I tried to be very religious, and to the point where even when things started happening around me that were, I'll call it paranormal or even psychic abilities, or things would happen, then I'd start to get afraid of it, because you're taught. And it's one of those things where we have abilities or things kind of conditioned out of us by the teachings of fear, that you're conditioned, all that's of the devil. Or, you mentioned 2,000 years ago you've been a prophet. Yeah, but 500 years ago you'd been burned at the stake as a witch. So it all depends on the society at the time. But going into my 20s, I really seriously began to question. I realized I don't believe that, which kind of messed me up a little psychologically for a while, because I was bitter and feeling like I was lied to. But it also took a long time to really look into things, look beyond the small stuff, look at the overall history, look at so many different things that I've had an opportunity to learn, even just doing this radio show, and the many different people that I've had the opportunity to talk to about, as I was telling you before the show, such a wide variety of topics that has changed my entire worldview, and has changed my view of what I think of as reality. And the psychic abilities, I feel, come into that because they're a part of our reality that a lot of people deny. I'm not going to say most people anymore, because I think we have reached a little bit of a paradigm shift where more people are accepting of it, especially in non-Western cultures.
I think there are far less people denying it.
Yes. And again, it's mostly in the Western cultures. When you start dealing with Eastern or South American or, more indigenous cultures, they're very much in tune with the spirit. Or you have with Native Americans, with the medicine men and their spiritual beliefs, but they were working a lot with psychic abilities as well in a lot of their practices.
Well, that's how we evolved.
Yeah. Well, I think we're re-evolving, because I do believe that we've had these abilities a long, long time ago. It was one of the things that I told you about.
We were born with them.
Yeah.
We have them. And until we started paying more attention to what our analytical mind tells us rather than our inner self. When we started to using our logic mind more than our instincts, the intuition side just sort of got left behind. But it always is capable of coming out, and you can always get in touch with it. You know, you were talking about going to high school. I completed grade 8 and 2 months of grade 9, and that was when from that was the end of my education. I spent the rest of the time on the street surviving. So I used my psychic abilities to survive, and that's how they were developed.
Now,
so I wasn't focusing so much on the spiritual. I was focusing on surviving. However, the way I did it was by looking after and giving service to others.
No, and that's a noble cause, a noble direction for your life too. I really believe.
But that is how I've been led. I did that even as a child. That was my instinct to give service even as a child. It wasn't a conscious decision so much as it's just what I do or did and still do.
Now, people who want to get in touch with you when you're doing your reading, first of all, do you only talk to people in person, or do you do virtual readings? Or
yes, of course, I do all the modern stuff, and I do Zoom readings and in-person readings also. So you can find me on my website, robertlindsymilne.com. And you can find me on Facebook under Robert Lyndsy Milne, and I'm on Instagram as well. So they're the 3 ways that you can get in touch with me.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Robert, I just want to thank you so much for coming on to the program tonight.
And in about 3 weeks from now, my podcast is going to be launched, and it's called My Side of the Crystal Ball. So in about 3 weeks. So you can contact me on my website or on Facebook for more information.
Oh, fantastic. Okay.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for coming on the show, and really enjoyed chatting with you. We'll have to have you come on again sometime.
Anytime you'd like to invite me. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been great. I've loved listening to what you have to say. It's very interesting. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in to another episode of the Paranormal UK Radio Show, the flagship show here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And for those of you wanting to know where you can find us, it's pretty much everywhere. Wherever podcasts, major podcasts are listed, Apple, Samsung, Google, TuneIn Radio, you name it, we're there. And of course, our streaming radio station at paukradio.com. Everyone, you have a great week. And like I said, we will be off next week. So look for us in 2 weeks from now, and we'll have another show for you. Anyway, everyone, take care, and we'll talk with you soon. Have a good one.